Welcome back to Experts on Call. I'm Joe Leary. The subject today is the services of a notary public as we talk about her first-time homebuyers. Our guest is Tammy Morin-Nakashima. Now, Tammy was commissioned as a notary public in 1995. She's practiced in Richmond since 1996. Welcome, Tammy.
Thank you, Joe.
And I must tell you that we were just having a little chat off the air, and boy, you really opened my eyes to something because we've been talking about first-time homebuyers, and the subject of wills has certainly surfaced in the conversation. But perhaps you can recite the tale you were just telling me that if a will isn't necessarily drawn up, this whole process can get extremely complicated.
Yes, thank you. One of the things for a home owner is if they're going to own the property, they decide whether they want it in joint tenancy or tenants in common. Joint tenancy means that the property would transfer to the surviving owner, as you already know. Still need a will, though, because if something happened to both of the homeowners, the property has to go somewhere, so the will would designate where the property is going to go in the estate. Sometimes first-time homebuyers will own property, and they'll have to put their parent or grandparent on title with them to help support the mortgage. Parent might take a 1% ownership. So if something happened to that parent and they died and they don't have a will, that 1% ownership has to go into the estate, and it's very complicated to transfer it out of the estate and then back to the registered owners.
So a way then to circumvent that, a possibility would be then the homeowners, both people in the joint tenancy would have separate wills, or they would have a joint will?
They would have separate wills.
Separate wills, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
And so separate wills, because you never know who's going to go first.
Right.
So depending on who went first, how the property flows. This year, we're expecting to see a change in some legislation such that up until now, there's an act that's called the Presumption of Death Act. And if you owned in joint tenancy, it would be presumed that the eldest person died first, and the property would transfer to the youngest person in the scenario where they don't know who died first in a common disaster. And that act is going to be changed such that if joint owners died together, this is after July we're expecting the change, if joint owners died together within 5 days of each other, then the property will be severed, the joint tenancy will be severed, and then that property will pass under each person's separate will.
Our guest is Tammy Morin-Nakashima. RichmondNotary.ca is the website. You can reach Tammy at 604-275-0070. I'm wondering, by virtue of the fact that you bring this subject up, have you dealt with this subject before, and have you seen the possible ramifications of somebody who perhaps hasn't had a will drawn up at that time?
Yes, the 1% scenario I mentioned.
Right.
I have had clients that came in, they were selling property, and at the stage when the documents reached my office, I was able to identify that there was a 1% owner. They told me their parent had passed away, and then they had to scramble to get a probate registered in time for the closing date so that there would be an authorized signatory that could transfer out that 1% to the new buyer.
Now, Tammy, we've been talking, of course, about first-time home buyers, and we heard Akash earlier was telling us the story of somebody who actually walked into his office with cash. I know that perhaps a lot of times it can be a daunting task for a young couple to try and raise anywhere upwards of $25,000 for a down payment. A lot of times they dip into mom and pop and or grandma, grandpa. Have you had experiences with that where all of a sudden, maybe a parent is giving you a bit of a boost, and then they're thinking, well, perhaps maybe I have some title to this?
Well, yes. In fact, we've seen a lot of purchasers, young couples coming in, and they've done the process through their real estate agent and their mortgage broker of acknowledging mom and dad have given them a gift letter for $25,000. And so down payment's taken care of. Now they're going to be responsible for the mortgage. Most lenders will require that the down payment is outright the buyer's money, and that there's no one else who has a claim to that deposit. So when we have the client come in and confirm with us, yes, I've got my down payment, they have to verify that they don't owe the money to anybody else. A gift has to be a gift. Now, on the other hand, we get phone calls from parents saying, I just gifted $25,000 to my child, and if the relationship goes sideways, I don't want that $25,000 being part of a divorce settlement. How do I protect myself?
Of course, yeah. So, and what do you tell them?
We tell them that they first have to make sure that the lender granting the mortgage to their children approves of that gift coming back to the parents. On occasion, there are some lenders that will allow a demand mortgage to protect the gift, but it can't have any repercussions in terms of a repayment schedule. It has to be only in the event that something happened, it would be outright paid back. But many lenders don't want even to get involved in that, a gift being a gift.
Well, again, I would think that, in my estimation, if somebody writes me a check and says, here, apply this towards your down payment, then that would be mine to deal with. But I never really thought that perhaps that maybe somebody could lay claim to that down the road.
Exactly. That can create a problem. Right. And so...
Not to mention the determination of family relationship, too.
Exactly. So... when you're getting that gift letter, make sure everything's clean and approved and on the table, that everybody's in agreement about that before you come and see the notary. If you come and see the notary and ask them to undo that, any legal professional would have to then disclose that to the bank, that it was not an actual gift, and that could jeopardize the deal.
Our guest is Tammy Morin-Nakashima. She has been commissioned as a notary public in 1995, practiced in Richmond in 96, growing the office from 1 staff to 5 employees. So that would indicate then that there's a fair bit of business being done. What percentage would you say of your business is being done on closing homes and dealing with first-timers?
I would say at least 85% of my business is real estate transactions. We do a fair number of powers of attorney and wills as well. And my office is in Steveston, and we've sure seen that neighborhood grow. Quite a few home buyers are first-time home buyers, and then we see quite a few people downsizing and moving into strata for their benefit as retirees.
So walk me through the process then. I'm perhaps going to buy my first home. I walk into your office. I know that I need the services of a notary public, but I know little else beyond that. Perhaps maybe you can walk me through the steps. What are you going to do for me? And from start till finish, how long a process are we talking?
Well, if you've signed your contract already and you're coming in so that you just want to discuss what happens, I'm going to review the contract with you, take the relevant information to register the title into your name the way that you want it to be. We're going to coordinate with you so that you get your insurance, that you get your survey or title insurance as required by your lender. We're going to coordinate with the lender so that we have your mortgage money on time for the closing date. If there's any holdbacks, if there's any special levies for strata properties, we're going to find out that background information, deal with the property taxes, find out what's owing or what your portion to collect from the seller will be, because, again, depends what time of year your closing happens, who owes when. So we coordinate all of that with you, and then we give you the bottom line of how much money you need to bring in by bank draft.
So, in other words, then, you could possibly kibosh the deal for me. It's not necessarily a given. Maybe I've struck an agreement through my realtor. I've found a property. We've agreed on a price. There's been some subjects maybe removed from the bank. But by the time I go to the notary, you're saying that you could find things that would deter me from obtaining that property.
Very rarely would a client find a reason to walk away from a deal. I've been doing this since 1977, and I can tell you, I could count on one hand the number of times where a deal might fall apart after the fact. So one client of mine in particular, I can tell you a story. Their sale was to take place on a certain day. He had a tenant. It was a duplex. He had a tenant in one side. Lo and behold, the tenant caught the place on fire. So they didn't have a property to sell at the end. So the parties agreed to walk away from that. So very rarely, and it's usually an unusual circumstance, if you were buying a property that something wasn't disclosed to you by the seller, that might give you a reason to walk away because they promised you one thing, but they're not delivering what they promised.
Our guest is Tammy Morin-Nakashima. Tammy is in the Richmond area, has been practicing as a notary public since 1996. You can reach Tammy at richmondnotary.ca or call her at 604-0070. Well, you've heard our other guests talk about the typical process and the first-time home buyers. You've been doing this a fair bit of time now yourself. Who would you say is the typical consumer, or is there one, to avail themselves of a notary public with relation to buying their first home? It's generally younger, I would assume.
You're correct, Joe.
Right.
Most of our first-time home buyers are younger people. And again, I'm in Richmond, and we have a lot of people who have immigrated here.
Right.
So a fair number of new families to the country are purchasing their first home and may have never owned anywhere else in the world. So we get a good blend of first-timers there as well.
And are our regulations similar to other provinces or other countries, or are they relatively unique here in the province of British Columbia?
Oh, British Columbia is unique for first-time home buyers. In British Columbia, you use either a lawyer or a notary public to close on a real estate transaction. The only other province in Canada where notaries practice law is Quebec. So every other province, it's just a notary is just a commissioner, so they only can witness your signature. They do not practice in law.
So that must open some people's eyes, because obviously there's a lot of people that have moved to British Columbia from other parts of the country. Are they somewhat enlightened? Are they surprised by the process here in this province?
Yes, I see a lot of buyers that are coming in, and they're delighted that they can use a notary. They appreciate that they can come in and talk with us, bring their contract in before the closing date, ask us any questions, get organized on anything that they wanted to do, and then also full service, talk about the wills, the powers of attorney that they might need as property owners as well.
Tammy, we've heard from a couple of different notaries, and I want to ask you, there's no shortage of notary publics out there, but is it one size fits all, or is perhaps maybe one a little bit better fit for my services than another? And how do I begin that process if I'm looking to avail myself of the services of a notary public?
Notaries public all attend the same educational seminars. So our society puts out a seminar in the spring and then also in the fall. And then there are other organizations that we can attend, like the CLE, which is often where the lawyers will attend for their education. So notaries attend there as well. The difference might be that certain notaries might specialize in a certain area. They deal with subdivisions and happen to enjoy that. Some notaries really enjoy doing wills and powers of attorney, so the estate planning documents. And some notaries specialize strictly with doing real estate transactions. Are
there any particular pitfalls that one should be wary of when they're looking to acquire the services of a notary?
Make sure that you're comfortable speaking with your notary, that you can communicate, that you're on the same page. I think that's the most important thing. It's important. You want to make sure there's a really good fit, that if you do speak another language, get somebody who speaks your language so that there's no misconceptions along the way. And I would say generally, again, you probably would have no problem finding the notary to work with. We were talking earlier about the worst case scenarios, if you will. I mean, the joint tenancy and not being secured by a will to direct the property. In your estimation, would you say that you're finding that the clients out there are relatively well informed, or are they coming in rather green and learning as they go? Over the years, I've seen a really nice shift in the public's education about what notary work is and what they need to do as a homeowner, how to prepare themselves to purchase a home, what they need to do after the fact, that they need to get their wills and powers of attorney in order. In yesteryear, both my grandmothers are still living. They're in their 90s. Now, in their day, people didn't necessarily like to talk about a will and all their personal business. But in this day and age, I see a whole lot more of that at the kitchen table, where people know, oh, I've got to get myself organized, and rather than avoiding it, I want to take control and direct my affairs. Our guest is Tammy Morin-Nakashima. You can reach Tammy at 604-275-0070. The website is richmondnotary.ca. Just on that subject, have your grandmothers told you of tales of yesteryear, and what was the process like way back when? And is it infinitely more complicated or more streamlined today? Well, I think back in the day, my grandfathers owned the property, not necessarily my grandmothers. Right. And so that's one of the big shifts, is now that most times couples will own in joint tenancy. Right. And in the day, it was quick signature. I think very little was said about the documents, what they meant, and the impact. Nowadays, if you come in and you're going to sign with me, I'm going to spend 45 minutes with you as a first-time home buyer, so that when you walk out of my office, you understand what you signed and what your obligations are. And that's the typical experience with a notary. I think the public is much more educated about their documents in the modern era than it was in yesteryear. And let's talk about the fees. Are they generally standard from one notary to the next? Is it a scale that is determined by the society provincially? In the 80s, they had a fee schedule, and that was kiboshed over the years, so it no longer exists. I would say that most fees are fairly competitive. It's fairly standard industry in terms of we deal with the land title office, we're dealing with certain registration costs, and the work is fairly comparable. So the costs might differ a little bit between offices. I don't think that the range is that large.
And again, you said that it's important that you find the right fit, if you will. You've been doing this an awfully long time. What would you say is your typical consumer today?
Oh, I have clients that come from the island. They come from Prince George. They come from everyone, all ages. So all ages. And again, the typical story for most of us notaries is we end up with grandma, with the grandchildren, and all the ages in between, and the friends and the referrals. So we really enjoy quite a nice cross-section.
I think that the one lesson that I learned going back some years was when you acquire your first piece of property. I don't know that I perhaps was really that aware of. You're told by various stages along the process, your realtor will tell you this is what you need to do. But I think that there's an awful lot of work that notaries do that obviously it's invaluable. And I think that perhaps once you've been through the process, maybe it seems a little daunting going in, but it certainly eases the way for future acquisitions, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. I had a client in today that I was signing up. She was selling her property. She owns strata property. And she just got news that there was a special levy coming down the pike. Now, that's not going to be voted on until the day before her closing. Right. So the big question is, well, if it passes, who pays? The contract, in her case, the realtor did a great job. It's very clear that up to the closing date, any special levies are her responsibility. After the closing date, if the resolution fails, it will belong to the buyer. So typically those are the kind of questions we have going through everything is what does this mean exactly in a surprise scenario like that?
Our guest, Tammy Morin-Nakashima, you can reach her at richmondnotary.ca. You can phone her at 604-275-0070. Tammy, thank you.
You're welcome.
Experts on Call. I'm Joe Leary on AM650.